When you look at any massive organization, I mean, from a brand new startup to a huge multinational, they're all governed by rules.
A whole framework.
And we, as the public, we get obsessed with the outcomes, right?
Yeah.
Did they buy that competitor? Did the CEO get fired?
We see the headlines, the big power struggles, the corporate drama.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we almost never see the infrastructure behind it, the actual legal mechanics of how those battles are fought and won.
That is such a good point. We see the result, the new policy or the merger, but we don't look under the hood at the engine. And that engine is the system of corporate decision-making.
Right.
And these aren't just, like, suggestions. These are the formal, legally binding rules that say exactly how much power is needed to turn an idea into a legal reality.
And that engine is exactly what we're diving into today.
Mm-hmm.
You shared some incredibly focused source material with us. It's a very clinical breakdown of these rules of engagement for how power really works in a company.
It is.
It feels like the difference between just guessing what's going on in the boardroom and actually having like X-ray vision into where the legal lines are drawn.
Well, that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to take that focused information and basically give you the strategic map. We need to clearly contrast the two main types of company meetings that can be called.
Okay.
And more importantly, break down the specific voting thresholds for three critical types of resolutions. Because knowing if a big decision needs 51% or, say, 75% support, well, that's often the difference between a company moving forward or being completely paralyzed.
Okay, let's unpack this. So when we talk about company meetings, I think most people just picture, a generic boardroom gathering.
Right, a bunch of people around a table.
But legally, these gatherings are fundamentally different, not just in purpose, but in their timing, their gravity. We have to start there, right? With the two main types of meetings.
That's the foundation, absolutely. The two big categories are the annual general meeting, which you'll see called the AGM, and then just the generic general meeting, or GM.
AGM and GM.
And if you get the difference between those two, you immediately understand a company's rhythm. You know what's going on.
Okay, so let's start with the AGM. What is that? What's its fundamental purpose?
The AGM is the standard, mandatory yearly event. It's required by law in most places. You can think of it like a routine annual checkup for the company.
A checkup, okay.
And critically, it's mostly a backward-looking event. The business that happens there is usually pretty repetitive.
Like what?
Well, reviewing the company's performance from last year, formally approving the accounts, and then all the mandatory housekeeping stuff like reappointing directors or the auditor.
So it's scheduled, it's predictable.
Exactly. It's a rhythmic part of the calendar. It rarely springs major surprises unless, there's been some kind of spectacular failure.
So if you see a notice for an AGM, that's basically the company saying, okay, business as usual, time to review the books, re-elect the team. It's a signal of stability.
Perfect way to put it. Now, contrast that with the general meeting, the GM. A GM is, well, any meeting that is not the scheduled AGM.
So it's an unscheduled event.
They're typically ad hoc. They get called whenever a specific and often urgent decision has to be made that just can't wait for the next annual meeting.
So the AGM is scheduled for January, but suddenly it's June, and they announce a general meeting.
Yeah.
That tells me this isn't just housekeeping.
No. It signals urgency. It signals a big, forward-looking decision that needs immediate approval from shareholders. Maybe a competitor just launched a hostile takeover bid.
Oh, wow.
Or the company needs to raise a ton of capital fast for a new project, something that requires changing the company's share structure. These are high-stakes, often contentious decisions. That's why you convene a GM. It's like the corporate world's version of an emergency call.
And that distinction is so important for you, the listener, to grasp. If you understand this contrast, you can read a company's operational state. They announce a GM, and you know immediately they're dealing with something non-routine, something big, and probably urgent.
It gives you the measure of importance before you even know what the vote is about.
Okay, so now we know where these decisions get made. An AGM for the routine review, a GM for something urgent. Let's talk about the power needed to actually make those decisions stick.
Right, because as I mentioned, not all votes are created equal.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the votes themselves. What's the most common type of decision shareholders face? The standard mechanism.
That would be the ordinary resolution. This is your default. It's the standard legal tool used for the vast majority of operational decisions that come before the shareholders.
So the baseline.
It's the baseline level of power needed to just run the business efficiently.
And what's the mathematical threshold for that baseline? How many votes do you need?
It just requires a simple majority to pass, specifically more than 50% of the votes cast.
Just over half.
Yep. If you have 1,000 shareholders voting, you need 501 of them to say yes, and the resolution passes. It's straightforward majority rule for the day-to-day.
Now, 51%. That sounds almost deceptively low. I mean, if the goal is long-term stability, why is the default bar set there? Doesn't that risk, a company constantly shifting its strategy just because a tiny majority narrowly approves something?
That's a great question, and it gets right to the heart of operational efficiency. What's fascinating here is that the simple majority rule is actually designed to make sure the company can move, it can execute.
To avoid gridlock.
Exactly. Directors and management, they need to get a high volume of operational things approved quickly. Routine contracts, salaries, smaller share issues. If every single one of those decisions required, say, a supermajority, business would just grind to a halt.
Right. You'd be stuck in endless debate.
Paralyzed. So the ordinary resolution is really a structural necessity to keep the gears of the business turning.
So it lets the management team, as long as they have the backing of the biggest group of shareholders, steer the ship on routine things without being constantly blocked by a large minority.
Precisely. It allows the company to operate with speed. That 50+% threshold is a strategic tool for efficiency. It basically says, for normal business, whoever holds the majority gets to act.
Okay, so 50% plus 1 is for the routine stuff, the steering of the ship. But what happens when a company wants to do something bigger? When it's not about steering anymore, but about fundamentally rebuilding the ship itself?
Then the bar gets much, much higher. The level of consensus you need just escalates dramatically.
And that's when you move into
the realm of the special resolution. This is the high bar. It's reserved for the truly defining moments.
what kind of decision gets elevated to that level? What makes something special?
These are decisions that fundamentally alter the company's legal status, its governing rules, or the rights of its shareholders. They are the changes that rewrite the legal DNA of the organization.
So give us some of those big-ticket examples from this source material.
Well, the classic examples are things like changing the company's registered name, which is a core part of its legal identity. Or even bigger, altering the company's own constitution. We call that constitution the Articles of Association.
The rulebook.
It's the company's operating system, its rulebook. And changing those rules means you're changing the terms of engagement for every single shareholder.
So given how serious that is, the threshold must be significantly higher than 50%. What's the exact power level you need for a special resolution?
It requires a supermajority of 75% of the votes cast.
75%.
And that 25 percentage point gap between an ordinary and a special resolution, that is the legal line in the sand that creates stability and protects the rights of minority shareholders.
That 75% requirement, it feels deliberately designed to stop a bare majority from making radical changes on a whim. It almost sounds like controlling a company isn't just about owning 51%.
Oh, it's not.
It's often about controlling the veto, making sure the other side can't get to 75.
That is the crucial insight. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that 75% threshold is probably the single most important protection for minority shareholders.
How so?
Well, imagine you own, say, 26% of a company. If the threshold for big changes was only 51%, the other 74% could just completely redefine the company overnight. They could gut your investment, change your rights.
But because of the special resolution rule, if you hold that 26%, you have the legal power to block any of those fundamental changes.
Regardless of what the other 74% wants to do. Precisely. That 75% rule means that any shareholder or group of shareholders holding 25% plus one share
Has a blocking stake.
they have the strategic power to halt constitutional change. And in these high-stakes corporate battles, the goal often isn't just getting to 51%, it's making sure you hold on to that 26% block.
That's fascinating. That 26% is like the corporate version of a nuclear option.
It forces compromise. It ensures there's this deep inertia, this stability on the core issues.
So it's a structural defense mechanism. The ordinary resolution prioritizes efficiency, lets the company move fast,
Right.
while the special resolution prioritizes protection and forces a broad consensus on the really big stuff.
Absolutely. It's a deliberate balance between being able to run the business with 50% plus and making sure the business itself isn't fundamentally redefined without that 75% agreement.
We've covered meetings, we've covered the votes needed at those meetings. But in a modern context, do shareholders always need to physically gather? especially for private companies where people might be all over the world.
Right, where the logistics of calling a formal meeting would be a huge headache.
Is there like an escape route from having to get everyone in a room?
There is. And that leads us to the third mechanism, the written resolution. This is a really common alternative, mainly for private companies, that allows them to pass resolutions without holding a formal general meeting at all.
Okay, so how does that work in practice? Are they just mailing in ballots instead of showing up to vote?
Essentially, yes. Instead of gathering, the resolution itself is just circulated to all the members. It could be physically, on paper, or electronically. And they just sign off on it in writing, confirming their vote for or against. Once you collect the required number of signatures, that resolution has the exact same legal effect as if it were passed in a meeting.
That sounds incredibly efficient.
It's a huge win for speed and cost. Logistically, it's so much simpler, especially if your shareholders are spread across continents.
It does sound convenient, but my first thought is, does that convenience come at a price? Does that efficiency mean the resolution itself is somehow easier to pass? Is the bar lower?
And that is the single most important detail to grasp here. The efficiency is only in avoiding the logistics of the meeting. The legal power needed, the level of approval, remains exactly the same. The voting threshold for a written resolution has to be the same as if it were passed at a general meeting.
So if you're sending around a written resolution for an operational thing, like approving a land purchase, it still needs that simple majority.
Precisely. If it's an ordinary matter, you need to collect written agreement from more than 50% of the members. You still need that majority on paper.
And if that written resolution is for a fundamental change, like amending the Articles of Association, the company's constitution,
then you still need to hit that 75% supermajority threshold, all collected in writing.
so the format changes, but the power required to pass the resolution does not.
Exactly. The speed of the process is faster, the format is different, but the core power required to pass it, that 50+% or that 75%, that is the immutable bedrock of corporate control.
So what does this all mean? It means the legal weight of the decision is totally separate from the logistical hassle of the meeting. The format can be flexible, but that line in the sand, that 51% or 75% rule, is the legal fact that determines how quickly and how dramatically any organization can change its course.
So to quickly summarize what we've unpacked here, we've looked at the two meeting types, the AGM for your routine yearly reviews and the GM for those urgent specific decisions. And then we've clarified the decisive thresholds. The ordinary resolution, which needs more than 50% for operational efficiency, and the special resolution, which demands that high bar of 75% for fundamental changes and to protect shareholders. These rules really are the legal foundation of how control is used and how stability is maintained.
And this brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with. That simple 25 percentage point gap between an ordinary resolution at over 50% and a special one at 75%. That gap fundamentally defines the entire risk tolerance and strategic speed of a company.
It really does.
If management can get their plan done with an ordinary resolution, they're set up for rapid execution. They just need a simple majority. But if their goal requires a special resolution, they are legally forced to build a much broader consensus, one that has to include a big chunk of minority shareholders.
The inertia is built in.
Exactly. So consider the vast amount of strategic inertia that's built into the system just by whether a decision requires 51% or 75% support. That single difference dictates whether a company can pivot on a dime or whether it's forced to move deliberately, always protecting that crucial 26% block.